Chapter 7 of A Superfluous Woman by Emma Frances Brooke. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bruce Peary. The morning after her interview with McGilvray, Jessamine waked restless and dissatisfied. Her pretty scheme, running so merrily along the ways of self-content, had met with something in the nature of an upset. Had Miss Halliday been living in London, or anywhere within call of a fashionable friend who might come in to make the morning hours vapid with talk, her temper might have discharged some sparks. But Mrs. Mackenzie's atmosphere and the necessities of the day excluded the privileges of spleen. As well be spiteful in the front of a milk cow as in the eye of Mrs. Mackenzie. She lived aloof, irradiating kindliness and vigor, understanding nothing of the ins and outs of sensitiveness and fine feelings, but effacing these distempers by a beatific wholesomeness. So that Jessamine, who appeared with sombre eyes and brow, and an air of inscrutable melancholy, found herself compelled into an ordinary mood, and was finally driven by the sheer force of circumstances to help in the hayfield. A day or two after, rather to her astonishment, she found herself on McGilvry's land, stepping round, as it were, to make inquiries as to the progress of his hay. As she came near him in the hayfield, he looked up, desisted from his labour, lifted his straw hat courteously, then, setting the scythe to the ground, took a wide sweep of the steel through the hay, and carried himself by the strong leisurely movement a yard or two from her. Jessamine shrank back hastily. An unconquerable something kept turning its uncouth back upon her. That evening she somewhat flagged in the ardour of her application. She relieved Mrs. Mackenzie from her impetuous energy by going out for a walk. Upon coming back, she heard unusual sounds issuing from the open door of the kitchen. It was her custom to enter by the porch, though her apartments might be reached by another door. The doctor's counsel had run thus: return to simplicity of life, and do serviceable work. And Jessamine very carefully practised the maxim by an observance as minute as that of a Pharisee of old. She, therefore, repudiated the entrance set apart for herself, and took, by choice, the ordinary way. Her step was light. Indeed, curiosity prompted caution. The kitchen was filled for the moment by the weird sound which, in the Highlands, is strangely called singing, and she reached the threshold unheard, and stood there unseen to look upon the scene within. Mr. and Mrs. Mackenzie sat side by side. Mrs. Mackenzie was knitting, but she glanced now and then at a book which her husband held. Both were singing. Little Maisie, their only child, stood between her father's knees, listening. Her round grave eyes were, however, fixed in awe and admiration upon a fourth figure who sat opposite. Of this visitor Jessamine could see no more than one broad shoulder and a portion of a sturdy neck and head, for he was seated with his back to the window, a little withdrawn behind the door. But in him she at once recognized Colin McGilvray. There was one other figure which she could see entirely. This was a small boy, one of Maisie's numerous companions. He stood with his small elbows folded upon Colin's knee, and was gazing up into the man's face with a curiously fearless content. Jessamine beheld this picture undisturbed for the briefest moment. Then Maisie spoiled it by catching sight of her and pointing. The change was instantaneous. The song broke off, and both men dropped their books. Mackenzie favoured her with the smile of indulgent humour which was his usual greeting. Mrs. Mackenzie exhibited faint signs of momentary perplexity, and Colin, rising from his seat with his air of defiant respectfulness, made the peasant's salute by touching his forehead with his hand, without inclining his perverse head 1 inch from its uprightness. Jessamine's eyes encountered this indifferent, unbending look, and it seemed to her that a tear ran scalding down her heart. She repaid Mackenzie's smile by a faint, fleeting dimple, and hurried through the kitchen with averted face, closing the inner door behind her. Here she paused, anxious to know if the singing would recommence. It would have been interesting to learn if Colin's voice were rich and deep, to suit the colour and quality of his eyes. But no, not a sound. The silence of embarrassment enfolded the kitchen, and before she reached the top of the stairs, Colin's step crunched the gravel outside and retreated from the house. Then Jessamine entered her sitting-room, threw off her hat, and sat down by the unpropitiating square table, with her elbows on it and her chin in her hands. "It is almost," said she to herself, "as though I had died and been born again ugly." She gazed at the table with blank eyes. "Who cares for pretty Jessamine?" said she dismally. She listened again. The hushed song made a painful silence in the cottage, and the wind which murmured round did not fill it. Jessamine got up and wandered up and down the very small space of the chamber. "Oh dear," said she, "how real they are, and how impossible to get inside it. How they keep me off, and how they reject me. Oh dear, I don't want elegant trifles any more. I want some good substantial bread." To one so accustomed to court and welcome wherever she moved, whose lightest word and act had been received with plaudits, the experience was a bewildering one. Colin McGilvray was the chief offender. She began to wonder whether he really appreciated her beauty. She was quite sure he did not approve of it, of her. That last thought set her mind running into all sorts of regions hitherto unexplored. It was a much more severe discipline than Dr. Cornerstone's stern instructions. After all, that was a sort of court, for was not Dr. Cornerstone taken up with her? Now Colin ignored her. 3 days afterward the hay was gathered in. All except, they said, a small field of McGilvrays. And Jessamine, when the shadows lay long upon the ground, and the scents of pine and heather were warm in the air, went down to watch the final carrying. She seated herself upon a bank under a rowan tree, whose berries showed red among the leaves, and watched the moving to and fro of the figures at work in the field. Only Colin was there, and a boy and a woman, and only a few haycocks remained to be gathered and taken to the cart. Jessamine watched and waited until Colin came and thrust his fork into the haycock near her side. He freed one hand as he did so, and lifted his cap with his unaltered air of courteous indifference. "May I help?" murmured Jessamine timidly. "Thank you, you are most kind, but we are all but finished now." The boy led the cart up as he spoke, and he turned with the load of hay suspended upon the fork to pitch it in, but somehow a portion fell to the ground, and Jessamine, rising with a sudden impulse, stooped over it and gathered it up in her arms. McGilvray tranquilly deposited his share in the cart, and then, tossing aside his fork, turned to relieve her. "Thank you," said he once more, as his brown hands freed her from her burden. "You are most kind." But Jessamine lifted her eyes with wistful entreaty in them. The entreaty not of a vain girl to be sexually flattered, but of one human being to another for a recognition of service, and she fancied that for a second Macgillivray's eye held her at a less distant range than before. It was only for the briefest instant. Before the ripple of pleasure had time to rise in her heart, he was standing by his cart again, his back toward her, and was turning his horse's head away from the field. The hay was all lifted, and Jessamine was left alone in the sunny place, with thoughts that dimly yearned after austerity and goodness. After this, during the next 3 weeks, her encounters with Colin became frequent. With the hay season, a habit had been formed of wandering about Dalfaber. When she met the owner, she would pause with a pretty deference, the colour in her cheek and the wistful light in her eye, and ask some questions about farming. As these inquiries were at least to the point, he would find leisure to stop and to reply to them carefully. Sometimes a momentary relaxation of his unbending manner recalled the faint beat of pleasure in the hayfield, but oftener beneath his courtesy lurked sturdy defiance. Her acquaintance with the Mackenzies had taken a simple cordiality of condition from the first, but her acquaintance with Macgillivray was as a long journey upon an undiscovered winding road that has to be conquered by inches, and where, each corner rounded, the same figure walks before, the back toward one, and the face averted. End of chapter 7.